So when I had first joined the media industry, over time, through all the mistakes and trial and error, there's just so much that I learned. And a lot of it really just had to be done the hard way, either through mistakes or just not knowing what to do or just thinking improperly that I was actually doing it the correct way. And way back then, I really wish there were just small things and little idiosyncrasies that people in the industry who are more experienced than me or just have a different way of looking at it had told me before I had to learn those things. But I'm going to tell you real quick the 5 mistakes that you need to avoid as a new videographer.
It's the things that you do. And it's the smile on your face.
My first piece of advice is to just spend wisely. I know that sounds really obvious, but gear acquisition syndrome is real, people. Don't believe all the hype about the new gear, and I get it. You are a media content creator. You like having new toys. But if you're just throwing out $10,000, $20,000 on a new Cine camera, not because your workflow is actually requesting it from you or your clients might actually utilize that more, but in reality because you just want something to play with, that's a really bad idea. And think about what you could actually be spending that money on in the interim. You could be getting more tripods, more lighting, better audio, better kit accessories. Just so much more could be going into your accessory list that doesn't depend on just having something that's going to give you possibly a little bit more resolution or a little bit more room to work with in post-production if you're going to be throwing that much money on something. So my rule set for this is pretty simple. You should be scaling proportionally with your clients and your workflow, because all of that money that you start spending might actually add up even more in the long run. Because if you're investing in an entirely new camera, that means new lenses, new accessories, new power options, and just so much more that you have to deal with. And if you're lucky enough to live in a big city with something like ShareGrid, for instance, you can even rent from people who have the burden of the cost of owning that item for maybe 5, 10, or even 20% of the cost of that item as a one-off shoot expense. The client could even eat that, and really you don't need to be investing all that money unless it's truly worth it for you in the long run. And then finally, look at your work and your workflow objectively, because if that piece of gear really is causing you to spend more time either on set or in the editing bay, in a scenario like that, I'd actually recommend upgrading simply because it's going to shave so much more time off of your workflow and actually save you headaches and money in the long run. Number 2, you don't have a backup plan or insurance for anything you own. And you, of all people who are watching this video, know how expensive this industry is. You know what gear costs, you know what lenses cost, you know what tripods cost, microphones, whatever. It's not cheap. And because of that, all the things that you own are a potential liability, either through fire damage, air damage, sand damage, water damage, or just plain theft. And if you're throwing down all this money for what even is potentially your livelihood, you need to start treating that business like a business. Start looking into insurance options, which can be had for as little as $100 a year, or even less depending on the value of your gear. And at that price point, I mean, paying a deductible, a fraction of what your gear even costs, is going to be so much more easier than it would be to replace every single thing in your kit. You also should be treating all of the things that you're creating with your gear as investments too, because each one of those companies or productions that has invested time in you and labor is not also paying you for what you're doing on set, but also your ability to either store those files or create backups of them if they don't have a DIT or their own dedicated storage solution, obviously. But each one of those should ideally at least have 3 total backups. One on-site in one storage device, a second on-site in another storage device, and then nowadays, the third off-site one should just be anywhere. I mean, cloud storage is so cheap. Look into Google Drive, Dropbox, or something similar like that, because at this price point, you really shouldn't be having everything invested into one area that could potentially go wrong. Finally, if you can't get insurance and you don't have the money for a bunch of storage, at least have a detailed list of all the things that you currently own. That itself, just throw up a spreadsheet with some serials, model numbers, distinctive markings, kit accessories, anything like that is super useful in the event that, say, your items get stolen or pawned off or they go missing at a flight, because that serial number can inevitably be tracked to you through all of those police databases. You're focusing way too much on just the visual aspect of your kit, and your audio is really suffering. Because chances are when you really start to do all these first gigs, you're really gonna have to do a lot of one-man banding. And if your audio suffers, it's such a big component of the actual product that dealing with that in post-production is so much more worse than dealing with a bad image. We'd recommend sticking to well-known brands such as Rode, Sennheiser, Tascam, Zoom, Audio-Technica, or the like. If they have other products in their category and a good track record of delivering something high quality, chances are that the mics you're going to pick up from them are very good. And I'll tell you now, rookie mistake I see on a lot of shoots is that the microphone is mounted on top of the camera. Don't ever do this. If you have the ability to get the microphone closer, then your audio quality is going to be so much better. Just get a halfway decent mic stand that you could clip that boom mic into and route the cabling through it straight into the camera and maybe stick it a foot or two away from the sound source. And then finally, consider really investing in an external recording option, such as a 2-channel or 4-channel external recorder, because these are gonna have so much better preamps, noise floors, audio digital conversion, and just overall a much cleaner sound profile to them. And you're just gonna have so much more opportunities. And in addition to that, you'll also have the safety of knowing that if your camera fails, you'll still have the audio to work with. So number 4 is that you're just focusing way too much on the shoot itself and not the actual pre-production. Pre-production is a massive component of any media project, whether you're doing a small brand video all the way up to a feature-length film. You need to actually think about the story you're going to create, the shots you're going to frame, the actual people involved, and the overall concept. Each one of these is an integral component inside of the final product, and all too often, there's way too many people who just get on set and wing it. Planning is going to help save you so much time and even money if it's down to the wire on a shoot. Because let's face it, if you're a hobbyist or even a top-tier professional, you want to utilize the most amount of time and money that you possibly can have for a shoot. And you never want to run into a scenario where you're the one who's at fault for doing reshoots. We'd recommend pretty much any cloud collaboration tool that exists today on the market, whether that's Trello, Google Drive, Dropbox, Monday.com, anything like that. Or if you're an old-fashioned, real tactile learner, just break out a dry erase board and start going to town with drawing maybe even some stick figures on what the shoot might look like. Finally, be open to the collaborative process, because with it is going to come scrutiny and constructive comments, but also a fresh perspective that you haven't seen on your product before. Because in the end, if you are emotionally too attached to something, then you might be imprinting some of your own creative differences on that actual media project. And number 5, you just don't know your gear and you don't know your client. Because when you learned how to operate your camera, I'm willing to bet that you probably learned how to operate it for the content that you want it to create. Problem is so many people out there who are content creators unfortunately stay in this bubble. And you're going to get a client out there who wants something that's totally outside of your comfort zone, and you're going to need to know how to adapt to that request. Ideally, what you want to do is learn all the in and outs of your camera, including the settings that you don't see fit for your shooting scenario. You should also be somewhat following some of those trends, both in the marketing and the media industry, because every so often, each one of those is going to change and trickle down into the people who consume that content. And more often than not, you'll probably get somebody who's not in the industry requesting a very specific type of content. And if you have that ability to shoot that, that makes you that much more valuable. Now, this aspect of the industry also goes both ways. Don't just find whatever bandwagon all other videographers are hopping on and then also try and copy that. People who are famous for their own works are famous for just that, what they create, not what others create. So try to make something that's original while also putting your signature style on it, and then maybe peppering in whatever the trend is currently. If you can do that much, then you'll have that much more of a signature style that people will want to duplicate from you in the future. Now, I'm not going to tell you what's creatively wrong and right, but chances are if you are shooting a law firm ad, it's probably not appropriate to have loud EDM music, an orange and teal LUT, and whip transitions and glitches all just flying across the screen. Your job is to also think about who's going to be behind the screen watching this particular content and know what's appropriate for that business or the overall production theme. So that's really all there is to it. I know some of these are subjective based on your workflow or who you're actually working with, but the general ideas are at least somewhat applicable to pretty much anybody who gets into this industry. But really, we want to know how you work. Has there ever just been a shoot or scenario where somebody you wish had told you something beforehand that could have made it that much better or that much easier, or just fixed some mistakes that you didn't have to deal with in post-production? I know for a fact there's probably been at least one shooting scenario where just things went wrong wrong and it was just a simple mistake that you could have fixed. But go ahead and add your comment below in the selection if it applies to you, or if you've had any scenarios like that. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms, such as Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and more, to see more about our shooting stories. And make sure to visit us on skyfeatherstudios.com for the latest in media industry news. But until then, see you next time.